The Hells Angels biker heard the little girl crying at the truck stop, and his next move split the interstate open. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The rain was coming down hard, pelting the blacktop with relentless force, as the rumble of a Harley-Davidson echoed across the lonely truck stop. It was one of those nights when the road felt like an endless stretch of desolation, and Jake Morrison, a Hells Angels biker with years of battle-scarred history, was riding through it, looking for nothing more than a place to take shelter. But the screech of tires and the sound of a child crying broke the monotony of the night. Jake's eyes narrowed as he pulled his bike to a slow stop, his boots crunching on the gravel as he dismounted. The truck stop was quiet except for the eerie wail of a little girl crying somewhere in the dark. It wasn't the kind of sound you ignored, especially when you lived a life as rough as Jake's. With a quick glance around, he followed the sound to a dimly lit corner, where he saw her, no more than 6 years old, her face streaked with tears, huddled beside an old, rusted truck. Her eyes met his, wide with fear, and for a moment, Jake hesitated. He was a Hells Angels member, someone who had lived by the code that emotions made a man weak. He didn't deal with kids, especially not in a place like this. But something about her, her small, fragile form, the terror in her eyes, pulled at something deep inside him. He couldn't just leave her there. "Hey, little one, are you okay?" he asked, his voice rough like gravel. She flinched, pulling back, her tiny hands clutching a tattered teddy bear as if it were the only thing keeping her safe in this terrifying world. She didn't speak, just stared at him, her chest heaving as she tried to stifle her sobs. He crouched down, slowly, trying not to look as imposing as he knew he was. His leather jacket creaked as he moved, and the unmistakable patches of his Hells Angels vest glinted under the light. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said, trying to keep his tone as gentle as he could. The girl's lips trembled, and for a second, Jake thought she might run. But instead, she sniffled, her big brown eyes still locked on him. "Are you lost?" he asked, his heart softening just a little. She nodded, then pointed to the truck. Jake looked over at it. The truck's driver was nowhere to be seen, and there were no other cars around. It didn't sit right with him. He knew this wasn't just a simple case of a lost child. Something else was going on here. "It's okay," he said softly, standing up. "I'm gonna help you, all right?" The girl nodded but didn't speak. Jake extended a hand, slowly, making sure not to startle her. She hesitated for a moment, then placed her small, trembling hand in his. He gently led her toward his bike. The rain was still pouring, but now, with the girl by his side, it felt like the storm had turned into something more. It wasn't just about the weather anymore. It was about protecting this little soul. He didn't know why he was doing it. It wasn't like him to get involved. He was supposed to keep riding, keep moving, not get caught up in other people's problems. But as they reached the bike, the sound of a truck engine revved in the distance. Someone else was coming, and Jake could feel it. This wasn't going to end quietly. He knew he had to act fast. As he helped the girl onto the back of his bike, his instincts screamed at him. This wasn't just a child in need of help. This was the beginning of something bigger, something he wasn't ready for. But it was too late to turn back now. Jake fired up the engine, the roar of the Harley cutting through the night as he sped off, the little girl clinging to him for dear life. What was waiting for them down the road? He didn't know. But he was going to find out. The girl was his responsibility now, and for the first time in years, Jake felt something he hadn't expected, his heart, beating for something more than just survival. "I wasn't sure what I was getting into." The rain was relentless, pouring harder now, like it was washing away everything in its path. I gripped the throttle of my Harley, the engine roaring beneath me as I cut through the storm, the little girl holding on to me with everything she had. Her small hands clutched my jacket tightly, her body pressed against my back, but she said nothing. The chill in the air made it hard to focus, but I knew I couldn't slow down. Not yet. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, watching for anything that could be a threat. The rain blurred the headlights of the few trucks that were still on the interstate, but I didn't trust them. Something about this whole situation didn't sit right. She hadn't spoken a word since we left the truck stop, but I could feel her fear radiating through her, like a cold wind that cut straight through to my bones. We passed a few more truck stops, some completely empty, others with just a few lonely drivers sitting inside their rigs, waiting for the storm to let up. But no matter how many times I checked, I never saw that truck again. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following us. I didn't know who or why, but I wasn't about to take any chances. The girl hadn't given me any details, just clung to me like I was her lifeline, and I wasn't about to let go of her now. I could hear the soft sound of her breathing behind me, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself that everything would be fine, that this was just a bump in the road. But then, as I turned off the exit ramp, I saw it. A truck, parked on the side of the road. A big black rig with tinted windows. And in the rain-soaked glare of the streetlight, I saw someone standing by the driver's side door, looking right at me. I didn't slow down. My instincts told me to keep moving, so I did. I pushed the throttle harder, the roar of the engine drowning out any thoughts of what was happening behind us. The girl shifted on my bike, her grip tightening. I could feel her trembling against my back. Her body was cold, and I could feel her small heart pounding through her chest. "It's going to be okay," I muttered, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to reassure her or myself. The bike's headlights cut through the rain, illuminating a road I didn't recognize. The familiar landmarks of the interstate were gone, replaced by unfamiliar stretches of road and empty fields. There was no turning back now. I could hear the sound of tires screeching behind me, and my heart skipped a beat. They were following us. I wasn't imagining it. I glanced over my shoulder, catching a glimpse of the black truck, still a few miles behind, but closing in fast. I pushed the bike faster, the engine growling like an animal ready to hunt. The girl's grip tightened even more. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Please don't let them get me." I didn't have time to answer. The truck was almost upon us. I swerved, avoiding an oncoming car, my hands steady on the handlebars despite the adrenaline coursing through me. The girl let out a frightened gasp, but I didn't stop. Not yet. I could hear the rumble of the truck's engine behind us, its headlights now blinding in my rearview mirror. We were almost at the next town. I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. There had to be a place to hide, somewhere to lose them. My heart raced, and I could feel the tension building in my chest. Then, as if the storm itself had given us an answer, the lights of a small, run-down motel appeared in the distance. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. I swung the bike hard to the right, pulling into the parking lot of the motel. My tires screeched against the wet pavement, but I didn't care. The girl squeezed me tighter, but I kept my eyes on the road, the truck still behind us, slowing down as it approached the motel. I didn't know what would happen next, but I had no intention of finding out. I slammed on the brakes, stopping just short of the motel office. The truck slowed to a stop just behind us, its headlights blinding us in the rearview. I glanced over my shoulder again, but I couldn't see the driver's face. The truck stayed there, idling, as if waiting for something. And then, just like that, the engine cut off. The night fell silent, the only sound the heavy rain hitting the pavement. The girl didn't move, didn't say a word. She was still clinging to me, her small hands wrapped tightly around my jacket. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This wasn't over. I knew that much. Whatever was happening, whoever was following us, was far from finished. But for now, we were safe. For now, the girl was safe. I sat there for a moment, my fingers still gripping the handlebars, staring at the motel office through the rain-soaked windshield. The truck that had been tailing us was parked in front of the entrance now, its lights dimmed. The air felt thick with tension, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. The girl behind me was silent, her little hands still clutching me tight, as if the world outside had faded away. I couldn't afford to wait and wonder if they'd come for us. We needed to make a move, fast. I kicked the stand down and got off the bike, motioning for the girl to stay put. I didn't know who these people were or why they were following us, but they weren't good news. I could feel it in my gut. As I walked toward the motel office, I kept my eyes on the truck. The driver's side door was still shut, but the engine was off, the faintest sound of rain hitting the metal, drowning out everything else. I reached the office, my boots sloshing through the puddles, and the door creaked open. The clerk, a man in his 50s, looked up from behind the counter. His tired eyes took one glance at me, then at the girl sitting on the bike, before he quickly looked away. It was a small town, and small towns had their own way of doing things, quietly, without too much trouble. Room for the night? I asked, trying to sound casual. The clerk nodded, still eyeing me warily. He slid the key across the counter, the old brass tag catching the light. Last one on the right, he said, almost in a whisper, like he was afraid to say it too loud. I grabbed the key and made my way back to the bike. I glanced once more at the truck, my eyes narrowing as I saw a shadow move inside. Whoever was in that truck wasn't going to let us slip away easily. I could feel the weight of their gaze on me. Let's go, I muttered, starting up the bike again. The girl didn't speak, just clung tighter as I revved the engine. The sound of the Harley cutting through the heavy rain as I pulled into the lot, the truck following slowly behind. We reached the room, the neon sign above flickering in the storm. I didn't have a plan, but I knew we had to get inside. I parked the bike right next to the door, keeping an eye on the truck. It hadn't moved, but I knew it wasn't far off. I got off the bike and helped the girl off too. She was still quiet, her eyes wide and searching, as if she knew we were in trouble but didn't fully understand why. I didn't have the luxury of time to explain. I opened the door to the room and gestured for her to go in. The room was small, a single bed with peeling wallpaper, and the dim glow of a lamp in the corner made everything seem even more cramped. I shut the door behind us, locking it with a click. The girl sat on the edge of the bed, looking lost. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something worse than what we had already faced. I went to the window, pulling the blinds aside just enough to get a glimpse of the truck. It hadn't moved. I could feel my jaw tightening, my instincts screaming at me that this wasn't over. I turned back to the girl, who was sitting there, silent as ever. You okay? I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She didn't answer. Her eyes were glassy, distant, like she was somewhere else in her mind. The weight of her fear was palpable, and I knew she needed more than just a place to hide. She needed to feel safe again. I moved across the room, sitting down next to her. Hey, I said gently. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. She looked at me then, her small face filled with confusion, sadness, and something else. Hope. I could see it in her eyes, just for a moment. The door rattled as someone knocked. My hand froze in midair as I turned toward it. The sound of boots scraping against the floor outside followed. I didn't need to hear more. They were here. I stood up quickly, moving toward the door, my heart pounding. The girl stood too, her hands still clutching the teddy bear like it was her only lifeline. I reached for the doorknob, but before I could open it, the knock came again, this time harder. We're not open for business, buddy, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I had no idea who was on the other side, but I knew it wasn't good. Then I heard it. A voice from the other side, low and gruff, but unmistakable. We know you're in there, Hell's Angel. My heart skipped a beat. The voice was familiar, and it sent a cold chill through my veins. It was one of the men from the truck. I could feel it. They were here for the girl. And this was just the beginning. I stood frozen for a moment, my hand still gripping the doorknob, as the heavy knock echoed in the small room. The voice on the other side was unmistakable, rough, and cold. We know you're in there, Hell's Angel. I felt the weight of the words hit me like a punch to the gut. These weren't just random men. They were looking for something. They were here for the girl who had already seen too much. I didn't know exactly who they were, but I could feel the danger in the air, thick and suffocating. I had to think fast. The girl was standing behind me now, her little hands clutching her teddy bear like it was the only thing keeping her together. I could feel her fear, but she was trying to be brave. She trusted me, and I wasn't about to let her down. Stay behind me, I whispered to her, my voice barely audible over the pounding rain. I took a deep breath and squared my shoulders. There was no way I was letting anyone get to her, not while I still had breath in my lungs. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I had no intention of opening the door. I didn't need to. Instead, I moved toward the small window in the corner of the room. I peeked through the blinds just enough to see what was going on outside. The black truck was still parked in front, the engine off, the headlights dim. But now, I could see figures moving around the truck. At least 3 of them. They were waiting for something, or someone. I could feel the cold sweat starting to bead on my forehead. I knew I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to face whoever was on the other side of that door. But I didn't have a choice. I turned back to the girl, my mind racing. Stay here, I told her. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't argue. She understood. I turned back to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm not letting you in," I called out, my voice steady but filled with a quiet fury. "You don't want this to go down the hard way." I heard a low chuckle on the other side of the door, and then the voice spoke again, this time with a mocking tone. "We're not here to talk, Hell's Angel. Open up, or we'll make you." I could feel my pulse quicken. This wasn't a negotiation. These guys weren't here for anything good. They were here for the girl, and they weren't going to leave without her. I needed to buy some time. I couldn't face them all at once. Not like this. I turned and grabbed the old chair from the corner, wedging it under the door handle. It wouldn't hold them long, but it would buy me a few precious minutes. I turned back to the girl and saw the look of confusion and fear on her face. "Listen to me," I said, my voice as calm as I could make it. "I need you to be strong for a minute, okay? I'm going to make sure you're safe. Just stay here, and don't move unless I tell you to." She nodded, her small hands trembling, but she trusted me. I could see it in her eyes. I took one more look at the door and then moved quickly to the window. I needed a plan. I couldn't just sit here and wait for them to break through. I had to do something. I scanned the street, looking for any way out. That's when I saw it. A fire escape, a rusty old ladder on the side of the building that led to the roof. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had. I moved quickly to the window, lifting the blinds just enough to slip out. I could hear the men outside, their voices growing louder as they approached the door. The girl was still behind me, her teddy bear clutched tightly in her hands. "Stay here," I told her again, my voice low but firm. I slipped out of the window, landing softly on the ground below. I glanced back at the motel room, but the blinds were still drawn, and I could only hope the girl was following my instructions. The fire escape was just a few feet away, and I moved quickly, my boots thudding against the wet pavement as I climbed. My heart was racing, and my thoughts were a whirlwind of possibilities. The truck still hadn't moved, but I could hear the men on the other side of the building, circling around, their footsteps growing closer. They were looking for me, but they didn't know where I had gone. I reached the top of the fire escape and pulled myself up onto the roof. The view of the street below was clear, but now, everything felt different. I wasn't just running away, I was fighting back. I had a plan, and I wasn't about to let these guys take the girl. I took a deep breath, my eyes scanning the area. I had a few minutes before they figured out I was gone, and I needed to make the most of it. I turned back to the edge of the roof and saw a narrow alleyway that led to the back of the motel. If I could get there, I could make my way around and get back to the girl without them noticing. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best shot I had. I crouched down and moved toward the edge of the building, my mind working fast. Every decision counted now. There was no room for mistakes. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me, but there was no turning back. I had to protect her, and I was going to do whatever it took. I crouched low, moving swiftly across the roof, my heart pounding in my chest. The alleyway below seemed like my only escape route, and I had no time to waste. The sound of footsteps echoed from behind me, and I knew they were getting closer. I reached the edge of the roof and glanced down at the alley. It was a steep drop, but there was no other option. I pulled myself up to the ledge and surveyed the street one last time. The black truck was still there, but the men weren't in sight. I could feel the tension in my chest, and I knew I had to move fast. The fire escape ladder was only a few feet away, so I carefully lowered myself down. My hands gripped the rusted metal as I descended, each step slower than I wanted it to be. Every second counted now. When I finally reached the ground, I took a deep breath. The night was quiet, but I could hear the faint sound of voices coming from the motel parking lot. They were getting closer. I had to get back to the girl. I moved quickly, my boots hitting the wet pavement as I ran toward the alley. My mind raced. I couldn't let them find her. I couldn't let them take her. As I reached the back of the motel, I stopped to listen. The sounds of the men searching the area were growing louder. I had to think of something. The back entrance to the motel was just ahead, but I could already hear the truck engine revving up again. They were leaving, or so I thought. The unmistakable sound of a door opening caught my attention. I turned to see the men, their silhouettes outlined by the dim streetlight, walking back toward the truck. One of them was holding a flashlight, and I knew they were about to search the entire area. I had no choice. I darted behind the dumpster, my breath shallow, trying to keep my body hidden. I stayed as still as I could, holding my breath as the flashlight swept the alley. The beam of light passed right over me, and I almost let out a sigh of relief. But then it stopped. The man with the flashlight had turned around. He was looking right at me. My heart skipped a beat as I backed up slowly, hoping he wouldn't see me. But it was too late. He raised his hand and shouted, "Hey, I see you." I didn't wait to see if he was coming after me. I bolted down the alley, my feet pounding against the wet ground as I ran for the back door of the motel. The sound of footsteps behind me told me they were close. I could hear them getting closer, their heavy boots pounding against the pavement. I reached the door and yanked it open, slipping inside just as they were right behind me. I slammed the door shut and locked it quickly, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I pressed my back against the door, trying to steady my racing heart. I couldn't believe how close they had gotten. The adrenaline was still coursing through my veins, and I was shaking. I took a few seconds to catch my breath before turning around. The girl was sitting on the bed, looking up at me with wide, frightened eyes. She hadn't moved since I left, and I could see the worry etched on her face. "It's okay," I said, trying to sound calm. "We're safe for now." But I wasn't so sure. The men outside were still searching. I could hear their muffled voices through the walls, but they hadn't found us yet. I moved quickly to the window, checking outside to see if the truck had moved. It hadn't. It was still there, parked in front of the motel. The headlights were off, but I could see the faint outline of the men standing near the truck. They were talking, but I couldn't make out the words. My mind raced. I needed to get out of here. I needed to get the girl to safety. But the truck was blocking the way. There was no way out unless I figured out a plan. I turned back to the girl. "Listen," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "I need you to stay here. I'll be back as soon as I can. I'm going to make sure you're safe." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears, but she didn't say anything. She knew. She knew that we weren't out of danger yet. I moved to the door and unlocked it, listening carefully for any sound outside. I could hear the men's voices growing louder as they moved around the motel, and I knew I had to act fast. I took one last look at the girl before slipping out the door, closing it quietly behind me. I wasn't sure what I was going to do next, but I knew I had to get rid of the truck. I had to make sure they didn't follow us. I crept toward the parking lot, my eyes scanning the area for anything that could give me an advantage. I had no weapons, no plan, just my instincts. And they were telling me that the only way out of this was to take the fight to them. I could feel the adrenaline building again as I moved closer to the truck. The men hadn't noticed me yet, but I wasn't taking any chances. I knew I had to do something drastic. I couldn't just let them take her. I couldn't let them take us. I moved quietly across the parking lot, my heart hammering in my chest as I crept closer to the truck. The rain was still coming down hard, making the pavement slick and dangerous, but it also gave me cover. I could barely make out the men's shapes through the misty night, their voices low but steady. They were too busy talking to notice me, and that was my opening. I stayed low, my boots making barely a sound on the wet ground as I moved closer. My mind was racing, every possible scenario running through my head. How was I going to handle this? I didn't have a plan, but I couldn't afford to wait any longer. The girl needed me. I had to do something. I reached the truck, pressing my back against the cold metal, listening intently. I could hear the men talking, but their words were muffled by the sound of the rain and the distance. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The truck had a large toolbox in the back, and I knew that I had to get their attention somehow. I needed to make them think I was still inside the room. Without thinking, I grabbed a rock from the ground, heavy and jagged, and tossed it against the motel door. It hit with a loud thud, and I quickly ducked behind the truck. I held my breath, waiting for a reaction. The men stopped talking. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the rain. Then one of them cursed loudly. "He's still inside," I heard him shout. "Check the door." I stayed perfectly still, my heart racing as I waited. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of boots running toward the motel. The door creaked open, and the men rushed inside. I didn't waste a second. I moved swiftly around the back of the truck, my hands shaking but my mind clear. I had to get to the bike. I didn't know how long I had, but I wasn't about to let them catch me. The girl was still in the room, and I couldn't leave her alone. I ran toward the motorcycle, my feet slipping on the wet pavement, but I didn't stop. The bike was my only chance. I quickly hopped onto it, starting the engine with a roar. The sound cut through the night, loud and angry, and I could feel the power beneath me as the Harley came to life. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. The truck was still parked, but I didn't see the men anywhere. I glanced toward the motel room. The girl was inside, waiting, and I knew I had to get her out of there. As I sped away, I glanced over my shoulder. The truck was still parked, but I didn't see the men following. Not yet. I pushed the throttle harder, speeding down the road, the rain splashing up around me, but I didn't care. The world blurred around me as I raced toward the unknown, my only focus on getting us both to safety. I wasn't sure what lay ahead, but I knew I couldn't stop now. The girl was counting on me. The road stretched out before me, and I took a sharp turn, heading down an old, forgotten highway. There was a small diner up ahead, and I knew it was a good place to stop, get a moment to think, and figure out what to do next. As I pulled into the diner's parking lot, I saw the flickering neon sign. It was almost empty, just a few cars parked out front, but that was exactly what I needed. I parked the bike in the far corner, far away from the windows, and quickly made my way to the door. The girl was still on the bike, her small figure barely visible in the rain. I motioned for her to stay put, and she nodded, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and trust. I stepped inside the diner, the warmth hitting me like a wall. The smell of coffee and frying food filled the air. A waitress, probably in her late 30s, looked up as I walked in. She gave me a wary look, but didn't say anything. 2 cups of coffee, please, I said, my voice low. And a sandwich for the girl outside. She's hungry. The waitress nodded, a little hesitant, but she turned and got to work. I took a seat at the counter, trying to ignore the way the other customers were staring at me. It wasn't that they were unfriendly. It was more like they were curious about the biker who just walked in with a little girl outside. I kept my eyes on the door, waiting for the waitress to bring the food. My mind was still racing. What did I do next? Should I take the girl to the police? Could I trust them? And who were those men? I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching, waiting. The waitress came back with the coffee, setting it in front of me without a word. She didn't ask questions, and I appreciated that. She slid a plate of food in front of me, too. A simple sandwich. It wasn't much, but it was something. Is everything all right? She asked, her voice gentle. I glanced up at her, not wanting to show too much. Just trying to keep her safe? I said quietly, more to myself than to her. That's all I can do. She didn't respond, just gave me a small nod before walking away. I took a sip of the coffee, the warmth spreading through me, but it didn't do much to calm the storm in my mind. I had to keep moving. I couldn't stay in one place too long. I couldn't let the girl stay in the diner for too long. But for now, this was the safest place. I looked over at the girl outside. She was still on the bike, waiting for me, and I could see the glimmer of hope in her eyes. I just had to figure out what to do next. I had to protect her, and I wasn't about to let anyone hurt her. I stayed in the diner for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing with what to do next. The girl outside was still sitting on the bike, her small frame barely visible in the rain, but I could see the faint outline of her, clutching the teddy bear like it was her only lifeline. I couldn't keep her out there forever. I had to get her somewhere safe, somewhere they couldn't find us. My heart was pounding in my chest, and the weight of the decisions I had to make felt heavier by the minute. As I sipped the lukewarm coffee, I glanced over at the other patrons. They were still watching, eyes darting toward me every few seconds, and I could feel their silent judgment. The waitress was busy with another customer, her back turned, but I could tell she was keeping an eye on me too. Maybe she was just being cautious, or maybe she was waiting for me to do something. I didn't know. I didn't care. I needed to get moving. I finished the coffee in a few large gulps, then grabbed the sandwich for the girl. I stood up, throwing a few bills on the counter to cover the meal. As I walked out the door, the cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, but I didn't flinch. I had a job to do. I moved quickly, keeping my head down as I crossed the parking lot. The truck was still there, parked in front of the diner, and I could see the shadows of the men inside. They weren't moving, but I knew they were watching. The girl was still where I left her, perched on the bike, her eyes wide and alert. She hadn't moved an inch. I approached her slowly, my voice low and calm. "Hey, it's okay," I said as I walked up to her. "I've got something for you." She looked up at me, her small face filled with fear, but when she saw the sandwich in my hand, her eyes softened just a little. She reached out with trembling hands, taking it from me. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. I nodded, trying to offer a reassuring smile. though I felt anything but calm inside. I couldn't keep her here, not with the truck still parked in front. I glanced back at the diner. I had to think fast. I didn't know how much longer I could stay ahead of these men. We need to move, I said, my voice firm. She nodded, understanding without needing any more explanation. I helped her onto the bike, making sure she was steady before I swung my leg over the seat. I started the engine, the familiar rumble of the Harley filling the air, and I took one last look at the truck. It was still there, but it hadn't moved. That gave me a little time, but I didn't want to stick around and find out what would happen next. I revved the engine, the sound of the bike echoing through the empty streets. We needed to get as far away from here as possible. I turned the bike onto the highway, speeding past the diner, my eyes scanning the rearview mirror for any sign of the truck. It was still too dark to see much, but I could feel the weight of someone watching us, just out of sight. I pushed the bike harder, the engine roaring as I raced down the highway, trying to outrun whatever was chasing us. The rain was still coming down in sheets, but I didn't care. We had to get away. I didn't know where we were going, but I had to keep moving. We passed empty gas stations, abandoned houses, and empty stretches of road. It felt like the whole world had disappeared, leaving just the two of us in the dark, running from something we couldn't outrun. After what felt like an hour, I slowed the bike, taking a sharp turn off the highway. I needed to find shelter, a place where we could rest and plan our next move. The road was quiet, the only sound the hum of the bike beneath me. I didn't know if we were safe yet, but I wasn't going to take any chances. We came upon an old barn, the faint outline of it barely visible in the rain. I pulled the bike to a stop, my boots hitting the wet ground as I dismounted. I turned to the girl, her face pale from the cold, but her eyes were wide with curiosity, the fear still there, but not as strong. "We're going to be okay," I said, more to myself than to her. She didn't speak, but she nodded, as if she believed me. We walked into the barn, the door creaking open with a loud groan. Inside it was dark, but I could make out the faint shapes of old farm equipment and wooden beams. I helped the girl find a corner, making sure she was out of sight. Then I took a seat beside her, trying to catch my breath. We were safe, for now, but I knew this wasn't over. They were still out there, and sooner or later, they would find us. I just hoped I had enough time to figure out how to keep us both safe. I sat in the corner of the barn, the rain still pounding outside, and the distant thunder rolling through the night. The girl was sitting across from me, hugging her teddy bear close, her small figure curled up against the wooden wall. She hadn't said much since we arrived, just stared at the ground, her eyes filled with fear and confusion. I didn't blame her. She had no idea what was going on, and neither did I. But I knew one thing. She was safe for now. The barn, though old and worn, offered a small sense of refuge. It was quiet here, except for the occasional creak of the wooden beams and the relentless sound of the rain outside. We had a few hours at best before someone noticed we were missing, but I wasn't going to sit around and wait for that to happen. I had to keep moving. I had to find a way out. I pulled the hood of my jacket up to shield myself from the cold as I stood up, pacing back and forth in the dim light. My thoughts were spinning, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I kept thinking about the men in the truck, the way they followed us, the way they knew exactly where to find us. It wasn't just coincidence. This wasn't some random encounter. Whoever they were connected, and I had no idea how deep this went. I turned back to the girl, who was still sitting on the floor, her knees pulled up to her chest. I could see the fear in her eyes, the silent plea for reassurance. "Hey," I said, crouching down in front of her. "We're going to be okay. I promise you that." She looked up at me, her face softening just a little, but she didn't say anything. I reached out, gently brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. She looked so small, so vulnerable. A part of me wanted to tell her that everything was going to be fine, but I couldn't make that promise. Not yet. I needed to figure out what came next. I stood up and moved toward the barn door, peering out through a crack in the wood. The rain had slowed down, but it still looked like the storm wasn't ready to let up. There was a dirt road leading out of the barn, winding its way through the trees. If I was going to get the girl out of here, we needed to leave now. But I couldn't just walk out into the open. I needed a plan. I turned back to the girl. "Listen, we need to move. I'm going to get you somewhere safe. But I need you to be brave for me, okay?" She nodded slowly, still clutching the teddy bear to her chest. "Can you do that?" I asked again. She nodded once more, and I could see the trust in her eyes. She didn't know what was coming, but she was ready to follow me. And that was all I needed. I grabbed my jacket and made my way to the bike, checking to make sure everything was in order. The rain had slowed, but the road was still slick, and I needed to be cautious. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. I glanced back at the barn, making sure there were no signs of anyone following us. The truck was still parked across the street, but it looked like the men hadn't noticed us leaving. I pulled the bike around to the back of the barn, away from the road, and checked the area one more time. It was clear. I walked back inside and held out my hand to the girl. "Come on, it's time to go." She stood up, hesitating for just a moment, and then took my hand. I could feel her small fingers gripping mine tightly as we walked back to the bike. She climbed on behind me, her arms wrapping around my waist as she settled in. I could feel the weight of her trust on me. I started the engine, the sound of the Harley roaring to life, and we took off down the dirt road, leaving the barn behind. The world seemed quieter now, the storm moving off into the distance, but I knew better than to think we were safe. The men would come looking for us, and we needed to be ready. We couldn't stop. Not yet. As we rode through the dark, I kept my eyes on the road ahead, the wind whipping past us, the rain falling just lightly now. I knew the girl was scared. I could feel her trembling against my back. But we were moving, and as long as we kept moving, there was still hope. We rode for miles, the bike's engine growling beneath us, the night stretching on. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew I couldn't stop. We had to find a place to hide, somewhere far away from the men who were following us. I couldn't let them catch us. Not now. Not when we were so close to escaping. I glanced behind us again, the darkness behind us swallowing up any sign of pursuit. For now, we were safe. But I knew it wouldn't last long. The girl's grip on me tightened, and I could feel the tears starting to well up in my own eyes. I had to keep her safe. I couldn't let anyone hurt her. I pushed the bike faster, the road ahead still uncertain, but I had to believe that we could outrun them. We had to. The girl was counting on me. I kept my eyes on the road as we tore through the night. The rain now barely a mist, but the tension in the air was thick, like it was waiting for something to happen. The girl was still clinging to my back, her small form pressed against me, shivering despite the warmth of the bike's engine. I could feel her fear, the tightness in her grip, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. She was still trying to process everything that had happened, just like I was. The road stretched out in front of us, endless and dark. I kept my speed steady, trying to keep my mind clear, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. I glanced behind us, half expecting to see headlights creeping closer. But there was nothing, just the black of the night swallowing up everything behind us. We'd been riding for hours, and though the truck hadn't caught up, I knew it. It was only a matter of time. I wasn't sure where we were going, just that we couldn't stop. The girl's grip tightened again, and I could hear her soft breathing against my back. I didn't want to look back at her, didn't want her to see the fear that I was struggling to hide. I had to be strong for her. She was relying on me to keep her safe. I could feel the weight of that responsibility, pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. I didn't know if I was strong enough to carry it, but I couldn't back down. Not now. Not when she needed me. As we passed an old farmhouse, a dim light flickered in the distance, and for the first time in hours, I felt a flicker of hope. There was something out here, something familiar. A small town, maybe, or a place to hide for the night. I slowed the bike down, squinting through the rain, trying to make out the sign for the place. It was a gas station, barely more than a shack in the middle of nowhere, but it would have to do. I pulled into the parking lot, stopping in front of the small building. The girl didn't say anything, but I could feel her tense up, her eyes darting around. I put the bike on its stand, careful not to make too much noise. It wasn't much, but it was a place where we could regroup, maybe find some answers. I swung my leg over the bike and helped the girl off, steadying her as she stood. "Stay close," I told her, my voice low and firm. I walked toward the door of the gas station, glancing over my shoulder to make sure she was right behind me. She was. She always was. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the bell above the door jangling as we stepped inside. The smell of coffee and oil hit me immediately. It was small, with a couple of dusty shelves full of snacks and supplies. Behind the counter, an older man looked up at us with a raised eyebrow. He was in his 50s, maybe older, his face weathered by years of working in this place. He didn't ask questions, just nodded at the girl and me. I nodded back, my eyes scanning the room. "Do you have a phone?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. The man didn't hesitate. He reached under the counter and handed me an old rotary phone. I took it, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed the number I had memorized. The phone rang once, twice, before it clicked. "Hello," a voice on the other end answered, sounding just as tired as I felt. "It's me," I said, my voice steady despite the way my stomach was twisting. "We're on the move." There was a pause on the other end. "Where are you?" the voice asked. I could hear the concern, the urgency. "I don't know yet," I said, glancing back at the girl, who was still standing by the door, her wide eyes locked on me. "But we've got a problem," I explained briefly, leaving out the details. I didn't need to tell them everything. "Not yet." The voice on the other end was silent for a moment, then spoke again. "Stay put. We'll find you." I nodded, even though I knew they couldn't hear me. "I'm not staying here long," I said, hanging up the phone before they could respond. I turned to the man behind the counter, pulling out a few bills and sliding them across the counter. "Thank you," I said, my voice low. He just nodded again, not saying a word. I turned and walked back to the girl, who was still staring out the window, her face pale and tense. I could feel the weight of the silence between us, the distance that had grown over the past few hours. I couldn't blame her. She didn't know what was going on. She didn't know who was after us, or why we were running. She just knew that she had to trust me, and I was doing everything I could to make sure that trust wasn't misplaced. I walked over to her and put a hand on her shoulder, feeling her flinch slightly at the touch. "We're going to be okay," I said again, though I didn't believe it. I didn't know how this was going to end, but I had to keep pushing forward. I had to protect her, no matter what. The girl looked up at me, her eyes still filled with fear. But she nodded, and for the first time since we started this journey, I saw something else in her eyes. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, we were going to make it out of this. But there was still a long way to go, and I wasn't about to let my guard down just yet. I walked back outside, motioning for the girl to follow me. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, and the sky above was dark, but I could see the faintest glimmer of light breaking through the clouds. We had a long road ahead of us, but I wasn't going to stop. Not until we were both safe. I could feel the tension in the air as we left the gas station behind, the sound of the Harley's engine cutting through the night as we made our way down the dark highway. The girl was still holding on to me, her small body pressed against my back, her arms wrapped tightly around my waist, as if she was afraid I might disappear. I didn't blame her. The fear had been with us both since we started this journey, and I wasn't sure when it was going to end. I could feel the weight of it in every mile we covered, every passing moment. The truck hadn't followed us yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they figured out where we were. I had to keep moving. We needed to keep going, no matter how far we had to ride. The road ahead was dark, empty, and endless, but it was all I had. I glanced over my shoulder, looking for any sign of headlights in the distance, but there was nothing. The road stretched out in front of us, the faintest glow of streetlights flickering far off in the distance. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. I had no idea who these men were or what they wanted, but I knew they wouldn't stop until they had what they came for. I had to keep the girl safe. That was my only priority. I heard her shift behind me, her small body pressing against me as she let out a quiet sigh. I could feel her fear, the weight of everything on her shoulders, and it made my heart ache. I wasn't just running for me anymore. I was running for her too. I didn't know what had happened to her or why she was in this mess, but I knew one thing. She didn't deserve any of it. I could feel her tremble against my back, and I didn't know how to comfort her. I didn't have the answers, and I wasn't sure I ever would. All I could do was keep her safe, one step at a time. We rode in silence for a while, the sound of the engine filling the space between us, the rain now just a mist against our faces. The road ahead was still empty, the headlights of any potential threats still far off in the distance. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew we couldn't stay here. We needed to get out of town, far away from everything that had happened. I glanced down at the gas gauge. We were low on fuel. Not ideal. We needed to stop soon, but I didn't want to risk it. I didn't know how far the next station was. I pushed the throttle a little harder, the engine roaring beneath us, cutting through the quiet night. "We're going to be okay," I said softly, even though I wasn't sure if I believed it. The girl didn't respond, but I could feel her nod against my back. I knew she was scared. I was too. We both were. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't. I pushed the bike faster, hoping the road would take us somewhere safe, somewhere we could hide for a while. The further we got away from the truck stop, the better. After what felt like hours, I saw the faint glow of lights in the distance. A small town just ahead. We were getting closer. I didn't know if it was a good place to stop or not, but it didn't matter. I was running on instinct now. I pulled off the highway and into the town, my eyes scanning the streets for any sign of trouble. The town was small, quieter than I expected, with only a few cars parked along the road and a couple of lights on in the buildings. We rode through it, my eyes darting from side to side, looking for a place to stop. I spotted a small motel on the corner, a neon sign flickering weakly in the rain. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. I pulled up to the front, cutting the engine as we coasted to a stop. The girl slid off the back of the bike, her small feet hitting the pavement as she stood beside me. "Stay close," I told her, my voice firm but low. She nodded, her eyes wide, and I could see the uncertainty in her gaze. She didn't know what we were doing or where we were going, but she trusted me. I couldn't let that trust go to waste. I walked to the front office, the girl following closely behind me. The door chimed as I opened it, and the clerk behind the counter looked up from his newspaper, his eyes taking in the sight of us. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded in recognition. "Room for two," I said, my voice steady. He nodded again, sliding the key across the counter. "Last room on the left," he said, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. I grabbed the key and turned to the girl, who was still standing by the door. I gave her a small smile, trying to reassure her. "It's just for the night," I told her. She didn't say anything, just followed me silently as we made our way to the room. I unlocked the door and pushed it open, letting her go inside first. The room was small, a single bed with a faded quilt, a TV in the corner, and a small table by the window. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. I locked the door behind us and turned to the girl, who was already sitting on the bed, her teddy bear still clutched in her arms. I knew she needed rest, but I couldn't relax. Not yet. We weren't safe yet. I sat down next to her, glancing out the window. The town seemed quiet, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. I had to keep my guard up. I had to keep her safe. But for now, we were here, and that was something. I sat by the window, the sound of the rain lightly tapping against the glass. The room was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards as the girl shifted on the bed. She was curled up in the corner, her teddy bear still clutched tightly in her arms, her eyes wide and distant. It was obvious she wasn't sleeping, but I didn't blame her. I wasn't sleeping either. The weight of what we had been through, what we were still facing, sat heavily on my chest. I could feel the girl's fear, even though she hadn't said anything in hours. I glanced over at her, my thoughts racing. I needed to think of a way to get us both out of this mess. The truck had been following us for miles, and whoever was behind it wasn't going to stop until they got what they wanted. I couldn't figure out what it was yet, but I knew one thing. If they were after the girl, then they wouldn't stop until they had her. That was something I wouldn't let happen. I couldn't let it. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to shake off the exhaustion that had settled in. The room was small, not much bigger than a closet, and I had no idea what we were going to do next. My mind was racing, but there were no answers, just questions. I had no idea how long we could keep running like this. We needed a plan, but I didn't have one. I turned back to the girl, my heart aching as I saw the fear in her eyes. She was still looking out the window, watching the rain fall, her small frame almost invisible against the window's dark reflection. She hadn't spoken in hours, and I could see that she was just as scared as I was. "Hey," I said softly, moving toward her. She turned to look at me, her eyes wide, but she didn't say anything. "You okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded, but her grip on the teddy bear tightened. I could see the tears starting to well up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but I knew it wasn't true. I didn't know if we were going to be okay. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I couldn't let her see that fear. She needed someone to believe in, someone who wasn't scared. "We'll get through this," I said, my voice firm, even though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. She nodded again, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. I didn't blame her. We had been through too much in too short a time, and now it felt like we were trapped, with no way out. I couldn't think of a way to keep her safe, not from whatever was coming. There was a knock at the door. My body tensed. I wasn't sure if it was the men from the truck, or if it was someone else entirely. But I knew that whoever it was, we couldn't stay here much longer. Stay here, I told the girl in a whisper, making sure to keep my voice calm. She nodded silently as I stood up and made my way to the door, my hand resting on the handle. I glanced through the peephole, but I couldn't see anything. The hallway was dark, and I couldn't hear anyone. My instincts told me to open the door, but something held me back. What if it was a trap? What if it was them? My mind raced as I stood there, frozen. The knock came again, this time louder, more insistent. Open up, a voice called through the door. It wasn't the men from the truck, but it was someone, and they sounded serious. We know you're in there. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what to do. I could hear the girl moving behind me, and I knew I had to act fast. I turned the handle slowly, pulling the door open just a crack. Standing in the doorway was a man, his face hidden by a hood, his voice muffled by the rain outside. He looked at me, his eyes scanning my face before he spoke again. You're not safe here. Come with me. I didn't trust him. I didn't trust anyone. But I couldn't ignore the fact that he was offering something I desperately needed, an escape. I hesitated, my hand still gripping the door, unsure whether I should step forward or slam it shut. But before I could make up my mind, he spoke again. The truck is looking for you. If you want to stay alive, you need to leave now. My heart raced. He knew about the truck. He knew about them. I glanced over my shoulder at the girl, who was standing in the corner, her eyes wide with fear. I didn't have much time. I made a split-second decision. I opened the door wider and stepped out onto the porch. The rain hit me like a wall, but I didn't care. The man stepped back, motioning for me to follow. Hurry, he said, his voice low. I turned to the girl. Come on, I said, holding my hand out to her. She hesitated, but then she stepped forward, her small hand slipping into mine. Together, we followed the man into the night, the darkness closing in around us. I didn't know who this man was, or where he was taking us, but I knew one thing. It was our only chance, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. I followed the man through the rain, my boots splashing in the wet mud as I tried to keep up with his quick pace. The girl was right behind me, her small hand still tightly clutching mine. Her breathing was shallow, and I could feel the tremble in her fingers. She was scared, and so was I, but I couldn't let her see that. The man led us down a narrow, dark alley, his silhouette barely visible in the heavy rain. He moved like he knew exactly where he was going, and I had no choice but to follow. I didn't trust him, but he was the only chance we had. He turned a corner and stopped in front of a rusty metal door. He knocked twice, a quick and deliberate sound that echoed in the quiet night. A moment later, the door creaked open, and I caught a glimpse of a face. A man, older, with a scruffy beard and tired eyes. The man who led us here spoke a few quiet words to the man at the door, and after a moment's hesitation, the door opened wider. Come in, the man said gruffly. I didn't need to be told twice. I ushered the girl inside, relieved to be out of the rain, though the unease still gnawed at me. The room we entered was dimly lit, with old furniture and the faint smell of something burning in the air. It looked like a safe house, but that didn't mean it was safe. The man who had led us here stepped inside after us, closing the door behind him. We need to get you out of here, he said, his voice low and urgent. I turned to look at him. Who are you? What's going on? I demanded, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. We don't have time for questions, he said. You're not safe here, and neither is she. He nodded toward the girl, who was standing behind me, her wide eyes darting around the room. I turned to her, giving her a quick reassuring glance before turning back to the man. Who are you? I asked again, my voice softer this time. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. My name's Tom. I work for people who want to keep you both safe. But we have to move quickly. From who? I pressed. He glanced at the girl, then back at me. Those men who've been following you. They've got their eyes on her, and they won't stop until they find her. A chill ran down my spine at his words. I'd known it all along. They weren't just after us. They were after her. We need to leave. Now, Tom said, his tone serious. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the girl's hand again, squeezing it gently. Come on, we're going, I said, leading her toward the back of the room. Tom followed closely behind us, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to burst through the door any second. We moved quickly, our footsteps echoing in the silent hall as we reached another door at the back of the house. Tom unlocked it, revealing a narrow stairwell leading down into the dark. The air felt colder as we descended, and the smell of damp earth and mustiness filled my nose. It felt like we were moving deeper into something, a tunnel, a path that would lead us somewhere I couldn't see yet. At the bottom of the stairs, there was another door. Tom knocked once, then waited. After a long pause, the door opened, revealing a small group of people inside. They were older, mostly men, all dressed in dark clothing and looking at us with cautious curiosity. "They're here," Tom said as he motioned for us to come in. I hesitated but stepped inside, guiding the girl with me. The group didn't say anything at first, just watched us silently. Tom quickly explained the situation, his voice low and urgent. "They're after her. We need to get them out of here now." One of the men stepped forward, a tall figure with a weathered face. "You've got to go. We'll help, but you can't stay here long. The truck will be here any minute." I nodded, my heart racing. I turned to the girl, who was still holding onto me tightly. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. I tried to give her a small smile, but I knew it wasn't enough to reassure her. We were both in over our heads, and there was no easy way out. "You okay?" I whispered to her, even though I wasn't sure if I was asking her or myself. She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She wasn't okay, but I didn't have the words to tell her that everything was going to be fine. Because it wasn't. It wasn't fine at all. We had no plan, no safe place, and nowhere to go. But for now, we had to keep moving. We had to keep fighting. The men in the room began to move quickly, gathering supplies, checking the exits. Tom turned to me. "We've got a way out, but we need to be quick. You stay close to me." I nodded, feeling the urgency in his voice. The girl held on to me as we followed Tom through the small house, my mind spinning. I couldn't think of anything other than the men who were following us, the truck that might be waiting outside, and how much time we had before everything came crashing down. The weight of it all was suffocating, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop until we were safe. Tom led us to the back of the house, where a van was parked in the alley. The men had already started to load supplies into it, and I could see a few familiar faces in the group. "Get in now," Tom said. We didn't waste any time. I helped the girl into the van first, then climbed in after her, feeling the cool air of the night as we closed the door. The engine roared to life, and the van pulled away from the house, the sound of tires screeching against the wet road. I looked out the back window as we drove off, watching the house fade into the distance. I didn't know where we were going or what we were running from, but I knew one thing: we were running for our lives. I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on me as the van sped through the rain-slicked roads. The girl sat beside me, her small body trembling slightly despite the warmth of the van. I kept my hand on her shoulder, trying to offer some comfort, but I knew there was little I could do to ease the fear that had taken root in both of us. We were on the run, and every turn felt like a countdown. I glanced over at Tom, who was in the front seat, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror. The van's engine roared, but all I could hear was the sound of my own thoughts, the anxiety creeping up as the miles passed by. I kept thinking about the men who had been chasing us, about the truck parked outside that motel, and the way they knew exactly where we were. They weren't going to stop. I knew that much. "How far are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Tom didn't look at me, his focus still on the road ahead. "We're heading to a safe house," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "It's a few hours away. We'll get you both there and figure out the next move." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what safe even meant anymore. Every place we had gone, every stop we had made, felt temporary. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being hunted, that no matter how fast we ran, they would always be right behind us. I turned to the girl, who was still staring out the window, her face barely illuminated by the passing streetlights. "You doing okay?" I asked softly, my voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. She nodded, but she didn't speak. I could tell she was exhausted, her small body weighed down by more fear than a child should ever know. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, but I couldn't promise that. We were too deep in it now. The truck, the men, the things we didn't understand, it was all too much. Tom's voice interrupted my thoughts. "Stay alert," he said. "We're coming up on a checkpoint." I sat up straighter, my pulse quickening. "Checkpoint." I glanced at the road ahead, but I couldn't see anything that resembled a checkpoint. We were still on an isolated road, the rain falling in sheets, the trees lining the side of the road barely visible in the dark. What checkpoint? I asked, my voice edged with caution. Tom didn't answer right away, his eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. It's a precaution, he said finally, his tone guarded. There's a safe house up ahead, but we need to make sure it's secure. I didn't question him. I didn't have time to. Whatever it was, I knew we had to get there. We had to get to safety. The van slowed as we approached a small, nondescript building on the side of the road. There were no signs, no markings, nothing to indicate what it was. But as we got closer, I saw a few men standing by the entrance, their silhouettes barely visible in the dark. They stepped forward as the van came to a stop, their hands resting on the handles of rifles. I tensed, ready to react, but Tom just nodded at them. "We're clear," he said. The men nodded back and stepped aside, allowing the van to pass. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding as we drove into the small compound, a metal gate sliding shut behind us. The van came to a stop in front of a building, and Tom turned to me. "This is it," he said. "This is the safest place for now. We'll figure out what to do next." I didn't feel reassured. The weight of the uncertainty hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I helped the girl out of the van, my hand firmly on her back as we walked into the building. It wasn't much, just a small, windowless room with a couple of cots and a table in the middle, but it was a place to rest. I watched as the men who had been guarding the entrance closed the door behind us, locking it securely. The girl was still quiet, but I could see her eyes flicking around the room, taking in every detail, every sound. I didn't know what she was thinking, but I knew she was just as scared as I was. Tom turned to me, his expression hardening. "They'll come for you," he said, his voice low. "They won't stop until they get what they want." I nodded, my throat tight. I had known that from the beginning, but I didn't know what to do about it. There was no safe place, no place to hide, no way to outrun them. I had no idea what our next move was, but I knew we couldn't stay here forever. Tom gave a sharp nod and turned to the door, tapping a code into the keypad beside it. The door opened with a low click, and a man stepped inside. He was younger than Tom, but his eyes were just as tired. "We've got intel," the man said, his voice urgent. "They've got a lead on us." I felt my heart drop in my chest. "How long?" I asked. The man looked grim. "Not long. Maybe a few hours, maybe less." I turned to the girl, who had come to stand beside me. She was looking up at me, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. I didn't have answers for her, not yet. But I had to protect her. That was all that mattered. I turned back to Tom. "What do we do now?" I asked. Tom didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, his face hardening with determination. "We fight," he said. "We do whatever it takes to keep her safe." I nodded, even though I didn't know how we could fight. We didn't have the resources, the manpower, or the time. But I couldn't give up now. Not when she needed me. I would fight for her, no matter what. The storm wasn't over. It had only just begun.